Let's get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are taking a really objective, analytical look at a profoundly tragic event in modern history, the 2011 Norway attacks. Our primary focus today is to really dig into the specific reasoning behind the perpetrators' political targets. I mean, how exactly does an extremist choose their victims to maximize their ideological impact? Well, by examining the source materials, the timeline, and the subsequent investigations, we're going to piece together the anatomy of this incredibly calculated strike.
But before we get into the timeline, I want you to hear this. In the absolute chaotic aftermath of this unthinkable domestic terror event, a young survivor from the targeted youth camp was speaking to CNN, and she said, "If one man can create that much hate, you can only imagine how much love we as a togetherness can create." That one sentence completely captured Norway's immediate reaction. It was just this nationwide response of resilience and absolute togetherness in the face of terror. Keep that response in the back of your mind, because we are definitely going to revisit it later to see how time can shift a national narrative.
Okay, here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, the events of July 22nd. 2, targeting the political elite. 3, the extremist ideology. 4, failures in the response. And finally, 5, a nation's shifting narrative. Let's dive in. Section 1, the events of July 22. 2 attacks, 1 day. To really understand the motive here, we've got to ground ourselves in the chilling basic facts of that day. On July 22nd, 2011, a 32-year-old Norwegian far-right domestic terrorist named Anders Behring Breivik orchestrated 2 catastrophic attacks against his own country. First, at exactly 15:25 Central European summertime, a bomb hidden inside a white Volkswagen Crafter van detonated in the executive government quarter, right in Oslo. Then, while emergency services were completely scrambled in the city, the attacker drove northwest. Less than 2 hours later, at 17:22, a mass shooting began on Utøya Island at a youth summer camp. The attacker, who was disguised in a homemade police uniform and carrying fake IDs, systematically targeted the camp participants until he finally surrendered to a police anti-terror unit at 1834. The total fatality count across those 2 attacks was 77 people. 8 individuals were killed in the Oslo bombing, and 69 teenagers and adults were murdered at Utøya, with hundreds more injured. This staggering loss of life makes July 22nd the deadliest mass shooting committed by a lone individual in modern history. Section 2, targeting the political elite, a calculated strike. So the big question is, exactly why were these 2 highly specific locations targeted? Because this wasn't just some random act of violence in a crowded public square. It was a deeply, deeply calculated strike. Think about it. On one hand, you have Regjeringskvartalet in Oslo. The bomb was parked directly next to the tower block housing the office of the then Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg. That strikes at the very heart of Norway's current executive government. And on the other hand, you have Utøya Island. Now, this wasn't just any regular summer camp. It was organized by the AUF, the Workers' Youth League. By hitting that specific camp, the attacker was methodically targeting the next generation, Norway's future political youth. The crucial thread pulling these 2 locations together, the ultimate target was the ruling Norwegian Labour Party, known as OP. The government offices were run by the Labour Party, and the AUF is literally the youth wing of that very same party. The perpetrator firmly believed that the Labour Party had fundamentally betrayed the country through its immigration policies, and he decided they were the ones who had to pay the price. Section 3, the extremist ideology, inside the manifesto. To truly grasp the reasoning behind choosing these political targets, we have to kind of step inside the architecture of the terrorist mind. Just 90 minutes before the bomb blast went off in Oslo, he actually emailed out a massive 1,518-page manifesto. Central to his political reasoning was this concept of cultural Marxists. This was his explicit label for the European political and intellectual elite, and specifically the Labour Party in Norway. If you read his writings, he viewed these leaders as traitors. He thought they were actively allowing the quote-unquote colonization and Islamization of Western Europe. In his completely distorted worldview, a violent war against these political targets was literally the only way to save the country. Looking neutrally at the sources, we can outline his self-described ideology. He was identified by authorities and even by himself as a right-wing extremist and a fascist. He was fiercely anti-multiculturalism and heavily focused on anti-Muslim immigration. He claimed his actions were meant to protect so-called ethno-nationalists. Now, I want to be perfectly clear here.
We are analyzing his motives impartially, straight from the historical sources, just to understand the why behind the targets. We aren't endorsing a single viewpoint. But the facts show he targeted the Labour Party because, to him, they were the architects of the multicultural society he absolutely despised.
Section 4. Failures in the response. The Jorv Report. So, we've looked at the cause, but what about the systemic aftermath? Well, in August 2012, an official fact-finding commission put together by the Norwegian parliament released what's known as the Jorv Report, and it revealed some sobering systemic gaps. First off, the Norwegian Police Security Service actually knew the perpetrator had purchased material components. We're talking like 6 tons of fertilizer, but they completely failed to add him to a watch list. Second, during the chaos in Oslo, police failed to adequately act on a critical witness call that had actually identified the suspect's getaway car. And finally, when the attack on the island began, there was a severe lack of transport capacity. This meant police and rescue operations faced these devastating delays just trying to get across the water to Utøya. All of this led to the Jorv Report's most devastating conclusion: the Utøya massacre could have been prevented. The report explicitly stated that if the police had properly mobilized and acted on that witness call identifying the Oslo suspect, which came in just 20 minutes prior to the first calls from the island, the youth camp attack might have been stopped entirely. It is a really heartbreaking realization of how systemic gaps can cost lives. Section 5. A nation's shifting narrative, consensus or conflict. How does a democracy process a targeted political strike against its own government? I want you to think back to that beautiful quote from the CNN interview we looked at earlier, the one about love as a togetherness. The immediate reaction was this completely unified narrative of tolerance and democratic values. But we really have to ask, did that initial unity and consensus actually last 10 years later? According to survey data from radicalization research, that unified front has actually fractured. Today, there are 3 conflicting modern narratives. First, you have the democracy narrative, which views the event broadly as an attack on democratic values. Second, there's the diversity narrative, which sees it very specifically as an attack on multiculturalism. And third, the far-right narrative, which heavily emphasizes the perpetrator's extreme right-wing motives. And what the data shows is fascinating. Support for these different narratives now varies heavily based on a person's own ideological beliefs and partisanship. This really illustrates a tough reality about political terrorism. While the attacks were incredibly uniting in a short run, they've become quite divisive in the long run. Discussions about July 22 today in Norway are often politically polarizing. The memory of the tragedy and how it's interpreted now basically mirrors the existing political and ideological conflicts within modern Norwegian society. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away from our explainer today. When calculated, ideological violence strikes the very heart of a democracy. How do we prevent the long-term healing process from fracturing? How do we stop it from becoming just another political battleground? It is a highly complex question with no easy answers, for sure, but it's one that is absolutely crucial for any modern society to consider. Thank you so much for joining me for this analysis today, and as always, keep asking the hard questions.